Hi, everyone. It is a complete pleasure to be contributing to these conversations around how we, as individuals and organizations, become more imaginative and how we can use that imagination to build the futures we want. And when we talk about what it is that we do want, when we talk about what it means and what it takes to build those desirable futures, we have to first acknowledge what undesirable looks like, the futures we don't want. We have to acknowledge what is broken with our present world that lets us so clearly see that we need to do things differently. We need to move towards some alternatives that are far away from the current baseline, the current trajectories that we are on, where our cities are boiling, where our employees are languishing, where our kids are full of anxiety, where our livelihoods are increasingly uncertain, where our communities are fractured. And the thing is, you don't have to make sense of any of these risks alone, because there are many who have been watching and signaling to the world that these are the risks we face, like the World Economic Forum through their Global Risks Report, where they ask thousands of experts from around the world what is making them nervous when they scan the wider world for various social, technological, economic, political, environmental risks, and also how soon they believe those risks will become a critical threat to the world. And so in their report for 2022, we see some of those risks that they've outlined here in the shorter term, specifically here, from everything from extreme weather risks to the livelihood crisis to climate action failure, social cohesion erosion, infectious diseases, mental health deterioration, and more. And all of these risks are interconnected in a multitude of ways. We can't separate and isolate them out to say, oh, well, you know what, extreme weather risks or the livelihood crisis or climate action failure, that is someone else's problem. That's a different organization's problem. That's a bigger organization's problem, because this is all our problem. And it is very valid to say, even though that might be the case, I can't act on all of these things myself. I can't act on all of these things at the same time. But at that same time, we do have to recognize that all of these things are in fact acting on us, because that is just the very nature of what it means to live in an interconnected world. So if we took an example here, just to zero in on those connections, and if we looked at mental health deterioration, that is clearly connected to infectious diseases, as recent years have shown us with the skyrocketing rates of mental health illness that we have seen, connected to living through a pandemic, where we've even seen new language, like what we see down here, a new language like touch starvation, come into the forefront of people's minds, of the public's consciousness. And touch starvation is exactly what it sounds like. It's being starved of touch, of physical contact from other living beings, and the detrimental effects that has on people's health. Mental health deterioration is also connected to the livelihood crisis. And what we see here, deteriorating work opportunities, work prospects, work standards, whether that is unemployment, underemployment, lower wages, fragile contracts, the erosion of worker rights. And even if you, in this very, very immediate moment, are not experiencing these things, living in a world where more and more and more people are, of course, has to be contributing to this widespread languishing that we've seen in recent years. Languishing was called the dominant emotion of last year, and what we're looking at here is the most read New York Times article last year, and it says there is a name for the blah you're feeling. It is the neglected middle child of mental health. It dulls your motivation. It dulls your focus. And so it's not burnout, because we still have energy. It's not depression. We don't feel hopeless. We just feel somewhat joyless and aimless. And the name for that is languishing. and it eventually does lead to depression. And so, of course, many people are focused on this. Many small and large organizations are focused on this. Many leaders, many policymakers, many chief happiness officers in organizations are clearly focused on this languishing and are looking for solutions before it does take that darker turn. And if we look at one last connection to mental health, we see that connected to climate action failure. And we can see that through the existential dread that younger people, that children are carrying with them, where worries like these, what we see to the bottom, are very real to them, that you'll die of old age, but I'll die of climate change. And over to the right, we can see that young people's climate anxiety is being revealed in these landmark studies where children worldwide, they worry about the future. They feel let down by governments, where more than half of young people say that climate change makes them feel afraid, sad, anxious, angry, powerless. And so, why are we talking about these risks and about these interconnections when we are here to explore what it means to build imagination, to develop more imaginative companies? Well, we are talking about these things because the primary or one of the most powerful catalysts for building imagination is when we take a look at the world around us and we clearly believe that we can and we need to do things better. And so we need to imagine what that better can look like. And many organizations now are recognizing, as they do start to define and redefine what that better looks like, that it is no longer a viable strategy to say that when I imagine better products, better services, better futures for my organization, I am only going to look at this one specific thing in my domain while ignoring everything else that it connects to. Because a big part of the reason why much of what is broken is even broken in the first place is because many have been willing to do just that. Many have been willing to disconnect and isolate, to that what we do over here has no impact on, or to not even care about on what happens over there, whether the over there is even another part of our lives, certainly another part of the world, a different timeline, thinking we'll just do as we do now and we'll deal with the consequences in the future. Or thinking that what happens over there will not impact us, it's happening away from us, away from my very immediate line of sight, it's happening in a different industry. There are many ways to disconnect and isolate. But what happens with this mindset is that it leaves you less and less and less capable of seeing the full range, the full spectrum of events and developments that are likely already having and that will continue to have significant impacts on you and your organization. But here comes the good part, and it is why we are gathered around this festival for possible futures, and it is that we can develop the kind of mindset where it becomes natural to see those connections, to think in new ways, to importantly, to know that we can't build the futures that we couldn't even imagine in the first place. And the great thing about that is that imagination is not some preordained ability that is only given or gifted to the select few, whether that is the select few individuals, the select few companies, gifted by the imagination authorities. Imagination is a skill, and of course, skills can be developed. And so today, I would like to share some of the ways that we at Greyspace work to develop those skills, how we've worked to catalyze innovation and imagination in all sorts of organizations across the world. And I'll share a few methods that I've borrowed from our future casting process that can be incredibly helpful, useful, supporting in crafting those new ways of seeing the world and being more future focused and having a more futures oriented way of thinking, where we become capable of anticipating what might happen in the future. So how broader shifts might impact you, how the decisions you make also have broader impact, seeing those connections, where we become capable of not only asking what might happen in the future, but more so asking what do we want? What do we want to happen? What should happen? How do we imagine desirable alternatives? And then lastly, being willing to ask, what can we do today? Being willing to explore what actions can we take today to transition to the futures we want? And so if we take the first of these mindsets around anticipation, anticipating what might happen in the future, one of the most significant shifts that we are facing in our collective futures is an aging world. And here we see that framed as the longevity bonus, these extra 30 years that an older generation can now expect to live, if not more, as we know that we might be living up to 150 years. But even with those extra 30 years, we haven't really come to a societal agreement, a societal understanding over what exactly you're supposed to do in those 30 years, with even those 30 years. What's expected of you in this new stage of life? And of course, we know that there will be challenges. Dementia cases are expected to almost triple across the world by 2050. And we can see that alongside what we see here from the CDC, which is that loneliness and social isolation is linked to serious health conditions. Amongst them is this increased risk of dementia. So of course, it is all connected. But health and healthcare, when we think about this longevity bonus, that is not going to be the only thing that is impacted by an increasingly aging population. But this longevity bonus will have impacts to all sorts of aspects of the ways we live. Socially, technologically, economically, politically, environmentally. It will impact the future of our workplaces. What might it mean to have 5 or 6 generations, more generations at work at the same time? What will it mean to build a truly intergenerational workplace? How will this longevity bonus impact the development of our cities and our homes? Might 4-generation homes become the norm in many more places? Children living alongside relatives that are well into their hundreds. And what about this longevity bonus, the impacts of it on the development of our technologies, on the development of our concepts around exchanging value exchanges like time banking. Time banking is what we're seeing many people kind of have larger conversations around. Time banking is a form of alternative currency where instead of using cash, people trade skills, services, time, resources. And this is becoming a larger conversation as we ask what the future of our lives might look like, especially with an aging population, especially dealing with the uncertainty that we are dealing with when we think about our livelihoods. And of course, those first order consequences will kick off second order consequences. And so it is incumbent on you to ask how all of these impacts will connect to you and your organization. How might you respond in the face of these risks and opportunities? And you can also think about the decisions you make, how they cascade out and have these first and second order consequences, so that you can see this larger picture of what you have ahead of you. And we can even see this shift in people saying that we have to think bigger, we have to think in these more interconnected ways, in this pivot that many organizations are taking from user-centered design, so thinking that your product, your service, it only touches that one person, your user, your customer, to life-centered design, where we acknowledge that the products and the services that we design, they don't just impact the life of the user, but that they always have these cascading impacts. And so we need to be designing for life, designing for systems and understanding those impacts, which is a very future-focused mindset. And part of rethinking organizations for the future does mean developing these kinds of foresight mindsets and capabilities that can zoom in and zoom out, that can think across these different layers and altitudes, and that can handle this complexity, especially because many people, many workers, including younger talent, will not work for a company who is not willing to engage with a more life-centered design. One, too, which acknowledges that our definition of life includes more, has always included more than just the very, very, very immediate needs of human beings. Okay, so coming out from anticipation, as we now turn to alternatives and asking the question of what do we want? What are the desirable alternatives we want to imagine so that we can then ask, how do we experiment to bring those alternatives to life? And one of the most profound, one of the most prevalent questions that are being asked when we think about what it is that we want are questions surrounding what we want when it comes to our workplaces, our futures of work. And here we can see some signals that are connecting to this question, that people are in a way kind of putting forward their answers in this very moment from what they want from work. This says that 71% of employees would rather work from anywhere over being promoted or having compensation increase. That is a pretty radical shift. That is a pretty radical reframing of what prosperity looks like. But this everywhere workplace, as it's been called, this is not just about a shift in space or locations that, yes, of course, more people, they now work from home, they work from anywhere, at least for those who can. But this, what we're looking at here, this is more so about a reframing, a debunking of some of our deeply rooted stories about what good work, the good life, even about what progress looks like. And those are stories like this. Those are stories like time is money. That little myth, or that supposedly little myth, which sits down here, and which creates the foundations for larger worldviews, values, philosophies that say that time is only valuable when it's deployed in the pursuit of money. Then from those worldviews, we create our systems, social, technological, economic systems, systems which eventually end up creating the present reality, the present outcomes, the present challenges that we see in front of us. And in the case of time is money, this myth is the root cause of many, many, many unsustainable behaviors. And now people are saying, my time cannot only be measured by money. I want to value my time in a host of other ways. Time is joy, time is rest, time is togetherness. Time is well spent on my passions and my hobbies and learning new skills. And so, of course, more people are prioritizing flexibility in a job over money, so that they can take back their time to do those things. And when something like this, when a myth this deeply rooted, when that starts to, in many ways, fray and fracture, we're going to see many other things kind of being reimagined and reshaped around this desire to get time back. From more companies shortening the work week to 4 days, to the right to disconnect laws that we've seen spread from France to Portugal to many other places. These laws which ban employers from contacting their employees outside of working hours. And so as we come out from, exploring this reshaping, debunking, reimagining of a myth this consequential, this deep, this prevalent, this widespread, I think what this myth shows us is that when we think about how futures emerge, how futures are shaped, it always starts with the telling of a new story. Someone comes along and says, I believe that we should eat, we should work, we should play, we should travel differently. And I'm going to take it upon myself to show you, to imagine what that difference can look like. And this is deeply connected to when we think about our root stories, deconstructing them, and if we don't like them, imagining alternatives. This is deeply connected to many of the technological innovations that we are being promised will shape our lives, or being told that these are the futures that we will live inside of. One where everything is simulated, one where robo-bosses will supervise more and more workers globally, one where your work meetings will be recorded and processed by all sorts of technologies that claim to read your emotions. And the thing is, as people, as leaders, because I know many people that are watching this are leaders in your organization, instead of accepting any of these speculations, sure, in many ways, seeds of the future, proclamations, whatever you want to call it, instead of accepting any of these ideas as certainties, we can see them for what they are. They are questions, they are interrogations. Should we progress towards a world for us at our organization, for our society, where everything is simulated? And most of life, most of learning is conducted using these immersive technologies, living in these simulations. Should we progress towards a world where, for us in our organization, where robo-bosses dominate, or are the most prevalent form of leadership or management? Should we progress towards a world where our work meetings are increasingly recorded and processed by these technologies that do claim to read your emotions and oftentimes will produce judgments, interpretations, outputs based on what they are sensing? Oh, Angela's eyes are, darting back and forth. She must be distracted. Maybe she's sleepy, or the veins in my neck rather are pulsating in a specific way, and that means something. The pattern in my speech also means something else. Am I being particularly disrespectful in today's meeting? And instead of seeing any of these ideas again as certainties, we can see them for exactly what they are. They are questions and they are interrogations. Should we progress towards this world? And if you unpack, as you're asking that, should we, if you unpack what is the story, the belief, the narrative underneath these technologies, and if you come to a root story, a myth that you don't like, then you can reframe, reimagine that myth and build your technologies on top of a new alternative story based on your values. It all comes down to choices and values. The future is built off of our choices and their underlying values. And so now as we come out from alternatives and we ask, okay, we have the alternatives, we've imagined them, what can we do today? How can we act today to transition to the futures we want? And Three Horizons is an amazing way to think about those futures that we want. It's an incredibly powerful way to think about not just one aspect of time, so to think about the future, but to think across time, to understand the present, the future, and the transition, and how all of these horizons work together to create change. And one of the important questions that we should be asking when it comes to our present is exactly what we discussed in the beginning. What is broken with the present that we are willing to leave behind because we know it is broken? We know it is already in decline. And critically here, what stories are we willing to leave behind so that we can tell new stories about the future we want? And to not be bashful about telling those new stories because they might sound too hopeful or too far away from the status quo. What is the future you believe in? Imagine it, articulate it, so that you can then work your way backwards to say, what experiments do we need to be running in this transition to get to that future? Experiments with your teams, in your everyday work, in your wider spheres of influence. And when we think about these larger visions, and when we think about, some of the questions that are being put forward about how is it I want to live and what should the good life look like? This is an incredibly interesting question that sits inside of those larger futures that are being put forward. It's that, is ownership dying? Do we not want to own things anymore? Is it better? Is it easier? Is it more convenient to instead to rent, to subscribe, to borrow? And so from that vision, we are seeing many different experiments in the transition that are trying to speak to or move towards that future or asserting that ownership is dead. In the first of these images, we see this beautiful little baby, and it represents Vega. Vega is a kids' wear clothing that allows parents to lease children's clothing instead of having to buy new clothes every single time your child grows. So with Vega service, customers receive a bundle of sustainable designer baby clothes. And when those clothes become too small for your child, they're replaced with a new package of clothes one size bigger. And then their old clothes are delivered to another baby, and so on. And this here product as a service business model, which is also a key circular economy approach, this allows Vega to retain ownership of the product, which motivates them to produce in as high of a quality as possible, because the higher the quality, the longer it will last, and so the many more children can make use of the same article of clothing. Over to the middle, we see a different variation asking if ownership is dying. Hearth allows you to subscribe to your living room. So Hearth is saying you don't ever need to own a piece of furniture, a piece of home decor, because we will just bring it to you. This can be what you're looking at here, can be your January living room, and then you can have a different constellation for your February living room. And then over to the right, we see what we have known for a while, but, kind of different configurations of that. Car companies saying, you know what, with me, you can drive a different car every single day. Why would you need to own a car when you can have, this abundance of choice and of change? But as we look at these three experiments in this transition, it should also kind of cause us to take a step back and to ask some bigger questions, which is that should we own nothing? Is that the future we want? Do we find that future desirable? Who would this future be particularly good for? Who might this future harm? Asking these larger questions. Because something like, for example, Vega should compel us to not just engage with a subscription box with baby clothes inside of it, but should compel us to ask some of these bigger questions. And specifically, Vega, I wanted to share it as an example because Vega is no longer around. And that is part of what I think is powerful about Vega, is that in this transition, they put forward an experiment. They put forward new business models. They put forward new products. They put forward new ways of engaging in society. But in this transition, some of those things will only be transitionary. They will be temporary products, services, practices, policies. And we have to have the humility to know that that is what change demands of us, a willingness to experiment, knowing that nothing lasts forever. That experiment might only lead us to the next iteration, where we learn how to do things better, our next iterations, our next designs, our next ideas become that much more robust because we are willing to design for the temporary. And what we see here is another vision. Here it says growing buildings, but this is part of a larger vision around borrowing from nature. There are many industries, there are many people that are saying when we look out at the natural world, we can see a number of successful strategies. Why wouldn't we try to borrow from those successful strategies and use it as a way to inform our innovation processes, the way we build our products, our services, our environments? And here with the idea of growing buildings specifically, it's that we can grow buildings from mushrooms, buildings that are alive and that are able to repair themselves, buildings that can clean the air as they grow. Here we see the idea of glowing streets, how many researchers are saying we should look to nature. We should look to fish and fireflies and all sorts of organisms that already light themselves. We should borrow from this process of bioluminescence and again use it to light our homes, our streets. We are actively working on this. Why wouldn't we imagine a future full of bioluminescence? Here we see biotechnology companies that are saying we need to learn from the process of decay, and we can use that process of decay to develop better products. Here they are developing a laundry detergent that can work in lower temperatures, that can use less water. And I know that some people that are looking at these kinds of, visions and initial experiments will say that, okay, alive buildings and glowing streets, that sounds a little absurd. But then we also have to recognize that much of what we have now, much of our everyday life, the systems that we have built around it, the products we use, the technologies that we have built, they all sounded absurd when they were first released or spoken about into the world. And when we think about this innovation inspired by nature, we can also look to cooperative ecosystems, saying that we don't have to go at it alone. Often through building cooperative ecosystems, we can access that much more room to innovate, that much more room to experiment, that much more opportunities, like the Kalundborg symbiosis. So the Kalundborg symbiosis is the world's first industrial symbiosis ecosystem where companies partner up so that one company's waste can be used by another in this closed loop exchange of materials. So one company's trash is another company's treasure. And these companies, by partnering, by building this ecosystem, they have been able to lower their production costs, develop new business models by sharing personnel, sharing equipment, sharing information. And the Kalundborg symbiosis started 50 years ago, long before we were talking about what it means to build zero waste futures, more circular practices. They started 50 years ago with this idea that through cooperative ecosystems, we can do so much more than what we are capable of doing alone. And so coming out from looking at these horizons of time, navigating these horizons, the present, what we want to leave behind, the future, what we want to move towards, the transition, what experiments we can see people running and learning from. This specific moment in time, navigating these horizons, is incredibly unique because this is a start, stop, continue moment for many. And that is because we have seen the unmistakable reality of the past few years, which is that the world can change at times in what feels like just the blink of an eye. And that doesn't just leave the shadows of our minds. And so, as people, as organizations, as you are seeing and sensing this energy, this appetite for change, for imagining alternatives around you, use it. Channel that energy to innovate and to experiment with alternatives for the things that perhaps have not been working for some time, alternatives for the things that are already showing fractures or where you are anticipating future fractures. And more broadly, now is the time to experiment with new definitions of success, because we already know what success looks like now. But many of those definitions, they don't fit anymore, and they've not fit for a long time. But the great thing about that is that our ideas of success should have never been permanent anyway. They should always be up for review, renewal, reconfiguration, rethinking. And each and every person, each and every organization should see that as an ambition, should see that as an incredible opportunity, should see that as a mandate to imagine and to fight for the future you want. Thank you.